It started with a scream, sharp, high-pitched, and gut-wrenching. Not the kind you hear every day, not even the kind that kids make when they fall and scrape a knee. No, this was different. This was primal. It echoed through the quiet, picture-perfect cul-de-sac like a fire alarm ripping through silence. Neighbors poked their heads out from behind drawn curtains. I ran. I didn't think, I just ran toward the sound, my heart pounding so violently it drowned out everything else. There, in the corner of the HOA's so-called community flower garden, I saw a tangle of movement, shiny wire, red stains, little shoes. And then I froze. It was my daughter, 5 years old, barefoot. Her tiny wrists and ankles were bound with something that didn't belong in a neighborhood. It didn't belong anywhere. Razor wire, coiled, rusted, twisted into a sadistic trap that no sane human being would ever imagine, let alone tie around a child. Her face was streaked with tears and dirt, her voice hoarse from screaming, but she still managed to whimper. "Mommy, I didn't do anything wrong." I tore through the mess, slicing my own hands just to get to her, to pull her out of that nightmare. Blood mixed with sweat, and the wire cut deep, but I didn't care. The horror wasn't just in what she had been wrapped in, it was in the intent. Someone had meant to hurt her. Someone had planned this. And then I saw her, standing at the edge of the yard, arms crossed, lips curled in satisfaction. Karen, the woman who had complained about chalk drawings and bubble machines, who had filed noise complaints when my daughter laughed too loudly in the yard, who had sent notes saying our kind didn't belong here. She said coldly, "I told you to keep your brat off my property." I stared at her, speechless. My child was bleeding, trembling, and she didn't blink. She had no idea what she had just done. No idea who she was dealing with. She didn't know. Her mother wasn't just another suburban parent. Her mother was a federal judge. My name is Olivia Grant, and I've spent most of my life in a courtroom, not as a defendant, not on the stand, but behind the bench, wearing the robe, wielding the gavel. I'm a federal judge. It's a title that carries both weight and solitude. It's not glamorous, like television makes it out to be. It's late nights with files stacked higher than your head. It's reading depositions until your eyes blur. It's holding the responsibility of justice in a world that so often fails the innocent. But that's not where my real story begins. No, my real story begins far from the marble columns and solemn courtrooms, in a sleepy suburban neighborhood that promised peace, but delivered terror. We had just moved into Crestwood Oaks, a pristine, gated community on the edge of town. It was one of those places that practically sells itself with glossy brochures and manicured lawns. The kind of neighborhood where children ride their bikes in perfect symmetry, and every mailbox matches the next like it's part of some HGTV production. For most people, it was a dream. For me, it was a much-needed breath of fresh air. My husband, Daniel, had just finished a major architectural project overseas, and I had taken a brief leave after a particularly draining federal case. We both needed a reset, but more than that, we wanted a safe, stable place for our daughter, Lily, to grow up. Lily was 5 years old, with curls like spun gold and eyes that always seemed to be searching the sky for magic. She was a dreamer, a chatterbox, and curious to a fault. She was also on the spectrum, high-functioning, but with intense sensory sensitivities and a deep fear of abandonment. Everything about her was fragile and beautiful. I loved her fiercely. We thought Crestwood Oaks would be good for her. A quiet environment, no loud sirens, no hectic street noise. The HOA boasted safety, order, and a family-first approach to community living. What they didn't mention was the silent authority lurking behind the rules, the kind of authority that doesn't just manage trash collection schedules or pool hours, but silently decides who belongs and who doesn't. The first few weeks were peaceful, almost too peaceful. We unpacked boxes, met some of the neighbors, attended the welcome brunch at the community center, and settled into the rhythm of suburban life. I'd wake up to the sound of birds rather than courtroom buzzers. Lily would color on the sidewalk with her chalk. Daniel would prune the little rose bushes out front. I baked for the first time in years. Life slowed down in all the right ways. It was during one of those slow afternoons that I saw her, Karen. I didn't know her name at first. I didn't need to. You could spot her from a mile away. Always wearing pastel polos tucked into high-waisted khakis with a walkie-talkie clipped to her waistband and a clipboard in hand. The kind of woman who measures grass height and files complaints about unsanctioned wind chimes. She never smiled. She never waved. She never even looked you in the eye unless it was to skin you up and down like a barcode. She had the energy of someone who'd memorized the HOA manual like scripture and judged you by how closely you followed it. She lived 2 houses down at the corner lot with the immaculate artificial turf and the flagpole that change banners weekly from God Bless America to No Trespassing to support our troops. I tried being polite. I really did. I waved. I offered a good morning once. Her eyes passed right over me, like I didn't exist. But it wasn't until Lily left a tiny sidewalk chalk, drawing a butterfly and a sun with a happy face, that we heard from her. A printed note, laminated and zip-tied to our front door. Please refrain from defacing public property. Sidewalks are shared by the community and should remain clean and neutral. Vet petfun ha enfosem volunte. I remember holding the note, staring at it like it was some kind of joke. Lily was 5. The graffiti was 2 inches wide and faded in the rain by the next morning. I tossed the note. I told myself it wasn't worth the energy, but something about the phrasing gnawed at me, clean and neutral. It didn't feel like it was just about chalk. Over the next few weeks, the small things began to pile up. A notice was taped to our door about our garbage bins being visible past 6:01 p.m. Another complained about our garden gnome being a distraction. Then there was the letter about Lily's voice, her voice being incessant during afternoon hours and disruptive to those working from home. I started to feel it, the pressure, the watching. Every time Lily ran outside, Karen's blinds would twitch. Every time I stepped onto the porch, I'd catch her staring from across the street, like I had broken some unspoken code. But I still try to brush it off. I had handled criminals, corrupt politicians, and courtroom sociopaths. Surely, I could handle one uptight neighbor with too much time and a clipboard. Still, something was different about this neighborhood. It wasn't just Karen, it was the culture. People whispered rather than talked. They gave tight smiles, but rarely stopped to chat. One neighbor even apologized to me, quietly, for not helping during the chalk incident. She'll report us too if we interfere, she said. That's when I realized Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor, she was the unofficial enforcer, the shadow mayor of Crestwood Oaks. And we were quickly becoming her next project. One morning, I found Lily sitting quietly in her room, refusing to go outside. She said Karen looked at her mean and said she would call the man in the blue truck to take her away. I was floored. I confronted Karen calmly, but she denied it all with a smug smile and said, "Maybe your child misunderstood. Some kids just need stricter rules." That night, I watched Lily sleep, her little chest rising and falling under her teddy bear blanket, and I felt something unfamiliar, fear. Not for myself. I could take whatever Karen threw at me. But Lily? She was still learning how the world works. She believed in rainbows and kindness. She didn't understand that some people were cruel just because they could be. I started documenting everything, every note, every incident, every complaint. I took photos, made copies, even installed a security camera just in case. Daniel told me I was overreacting, that Karen was just one of those HOA nuts. But deep down I knew. I've seen this pattern before in people who abuse power under the guise of order. They always start small, almost invisible, and when no one stops them, they escalate. Still, I try to hold on to the calm. We spent weekends baking cookies and making crafts. I'd sit on the porch with Lily and read her stories while she drew with chalk, this time only on our driveway. I stayed polite. I stayed visible. I smiled even when it felt like my jaw would crack. But something in the air had shifted. The illusion of safety, of community, it had cracked. It wasn't just about HOA rules anymore. It was about control, about dominance. And for Karen, we had become the anomaly, the noise, the problem. And like every authoritarian I've ever dealt with, she didn't want a solution. She wanted obedience. I just didn't know how far she was willing to go to get it. Not yet. Not until that scream shattered our peace forever. And our quiet life turned into the worst nightmare imaginable. It started like a slow burn, not an explosion, not a war cry. Karen didn't lash out in a way that made it easy to catch or report. No, her wrath came like creeping ivy, wrapping around every inch of our lives until it became difficult to breathe. What began as a few condescending notes and passive-aggressive looks started to metastasize into something darker, more deliberate, and far more personal. The first sign of escalation was the noise complaints. Not from parties, we didn't have any. Not from loud music, we didn't play any. The complaints were about Lily's laughter. I received an official email from the HOA stating that there had been multiple concerns about child disturbances during what the community referred to as quiet hours, a time frame I'd never heard of before and certainly didn't appear in any HOA documents. I asked for clarification. None came. Instead, a second notice arrived, warning that continued disregard for neighborhood peace may result in formal hearings and penalties. That same afternoon, Karen stood across the street, watering her plastic grass with a smirk. I knew she was behind it. Everyone did. Even the mailman muttered something under his breath about Queen Karen when he handed me that envelope. But no one ever did anything, because she was relentless, and she was protected by the same rule book she twisted like a weapon. Things began to feel off. Our garden hose was slashed one morning, clean cut, no ragged edges. The small solar-powered lights lining our path went missing one by one. Lily's tricycle, which she always parked beside the porch, was found tossed into the drainage ditch near the edge of the neighborhood. She cried for an hour when we retrieved it, scratched, bent, one wheel missing. I reported all of it to the HOA. The response was chillingly robotic. We have no evidence to suggest HOA involvement or rule violations. But Karen wasn't hiding her disgust anymore. One day, I caught her standing near our yard boundary, snapping photos with her phone of Lily playing with Bubbles. Bubbles? I asked her what she was doing. She replied coolly, just documenting community disruptions for safety records. Her tone was like ice, her posture so confident, so sure of her impunity. She turned and walked off without another word, leaving me in stunned silence. Then came the fines. They piled up like confetti, unlawful decoration violations, unauthorized chalk art, improper storage of recreational items. Every week, another slip. I started to feel as if we were being financially strangled into submission. I knew the law. I knew our rights. But she had managed to embed herself so deeply in the HOA that fighting back within the system felt like punching a wall. Daniel, ever the optimist, tried to de-escalate. He suggested we just stop letting Lily play outside. It's not worth the fight, he'd said, but that sentence crushed me. Why should our daughter be locked inside? Why should her childhood be sacrificed on the altar of Karen's insecurities? One evening, I noticed Lily drawing quietly on the driveway with a stubby piece of chalk. A soft rainbow arched over a smiling cloud. My heart swelled, but before I could speak, she whispered, "Mommy, don't tell the mean lady. She'll make it go away." That night, I cried in the bathroom. I cried because my little girl was learning to be small. She was learning to shrink her joy to avoid punishment. No child should ever have to live like that. I began documenting everything obsessively: audio, video, timestamps, emails, security footage. I knew Karen would slip up eventually, but I didn't expect it to happen so soon or so savagely. It was a sunny Thursday. I remember that clearly. Lily had finished her juice and asked if she could go play with her dollhouse on the porch. I said yes, told her to stay within the yard, and watched her from the window as I finished cleaning the breakfast dishes. She sang to her dolls, made them dance. I smiled and returned to the sink. 5 minutes. That's all it took. 5 minutes of distraction. When I glanced back again, she was gone. At first, I didn't panic. Maybe she wandered to the side of the house. Maybe she chased a butterfly. I called her name, no answer. I stepped outside, heart rate rising, scanning the yard. Still nothing. I ran to the sidewalk, called louder. I knocked on neighbors' doors. No one had seen her. I could feel the panic rising in my throat like bile. My hands began to shake. I called Daniel, who rushed home from his meeting. We called 911. I activated our home security system, replayed every frame, nothing beyond her singing. No figure approaching, no vehicle stopping. It was like she'd vanished into thin air. Until I heard it. A sound, barely audible at first, coming from the community garden behind the HOA clubhouse. It was a whimper. A soft, pained whimper that didn't belong in that tidy little plot of ornamental shrubs. I ran like I've never run before. I screamed her name so loud I thought my voice would tear. Then I saw something glinting in the sun. Something metallic, something coiled. I pushed through the bushes, and my world stopped. Lily lay crumpled on the ground, her wrists and ankles bound with what looked like razor wire. Her face was pale, streaked with mud, blood, and tears. Her favorite pink dress was torn, and her small body trembled as she tried to speak. And Mommy, I was being good, I screamed. I screamed so loud it echoed across the entire neighborhood. I dropped to my knees, shredded my own hands, pulling at the wire, not caring that it cut into my skin. I held her. I sobbed into her hair. Sirens wailed in the distance, but time felt frozen. Then I heard the voice, calm, cold, and casual. She shouldn't have been trespassing. I turned. Karen stood at the edge of the garden, arms folded across her chest, not a trace of concern on her face. She looked down at me, at my bleeding daughter, like we were rodents caught in a trap. She's lucky I didn't call animal control, she said flatly. Your kind think the rules don't apply to you. My vision blurred. For a moment, I didn't know if I'd lunge at her or collapse. A paramedic pulled me back. Police swarmed the area. Neighbors stood frozen in disbelief. One of them, a mother of 3, fell to her knees sobbing at the sight. Karen didn't move. She stood, smug and righteous, as if she believed herself justified. When the officer questioned her, she claimed she had installed the wire to protect her section of the garden from animals and unwanted foot traffic. She denied touching Lily, claimed she wasn't even home until 5 minutes ago, but she'd been watching. I knew she had. Her expression was too familiar, like someone savoring a win. But this time I had proof. My security system had recently been upgraded with motion sensors, installed just 2 weeks prior after the tricycle incident. I handed the footage over to the police. It showed Karen walking briskly toward the garden from her back gate 20 minutes before the incident, gloves in hand, something metallic in her arms. Minutes later, it captured faint screams. Then silence. Police detained her that day. Charges were filed, child endangerment, assault with a deadly weapon, trespassing, and more. The HOA board scrambled, claiming no prior knowledge of her actions. But emails between Karen and the board president, retrieved under subpoena, revealed that she had lobbied for months to enact quiet child zones in the neighborhood. They had brushed off her suggestions as extreme, but did nothing to stop her. The community erupted. Some neighbors protested outside the HOA building. Others turned their backs, pretending it wasn't their concern. But the story had already gone viral. News vans lined the street. Federal judge's daughter attacked in suburban, HOA nightmare splashed across every headline. The trauma Lily endured, that was the real wound. The healing wasn't just physical, it was emotional, psychological. Nightmares plagued her. She flinched at shadows. She no longer wanted to go outside. She drew pictures of the wire lady with jagged teeth and red eyes. It broke me in ways I didn't know I could break. But I also knew this wasn't over. Karen underestimated me. She thought I was just another mom she could push around with HOA regulations and neighborhood gossip. She didn't know that I'd spent years dissecting legal loopholes and outmaneuvering hardened criminals. She didn't know I had the resources, the experience, and the fury of a mother whose child had been tortured. She thought this was the end of her story. But it was just the beginning of mine, of justice, of truth, of fire. She was about to learn what happens when you mess with a child, and her mother is a federal judge. The hospital room was quiet, sterile, filled with the soft hum of machines and the scent of antiseptic. Lily lay motionless beneath thin white sheets, her small fingers bandaged and trembling slightly even in sleep. The cuts on her arms and legs weren't deep enough to scar permanently, but the wounds beneath her skin, the ones behind her glassy eyes, those ran deep. She clutched her stuffed giraffe like it was the only thing keeping her anchored to reality. A nurse gently checked her vitals, avoiding eye contact with me, perhaps unsure what to say to a mother whose child had been found bound with razor wire in a flower bed. What do you say to someone whose world had been snapped in half by something so senseless? Daniel hadn't stopped pacing since we arrived. I sat beside Lily, brushing the curls from her forehead, whispering soft things she used to love, stories of mermaids and moonlight, about cloud castles and gummy bear forests. But her eyes didn't flicker. Her lips didn't move. She was present in body, but somewhere far, far away in spirit, and I couldn't reach her. That night, when the hospital dimmed the lights and Lily finally fell into a restless sleep, I stood in the hallway and made a call I never thought I'd make as a judge. I called AUS attorney, not to pull strings, not to flex power, but to make sure no one buried what had happened. Because I had seen how these things go, how a woman like Karen, suburban, white, HOA embedded, could spin a story into a misunderstanding. How quickly trauma could be dismissed as an overreaction, especially when the victim was a child, especially when the child couldn't articulate everything that had happened. But Karen had made two fatal mistakes. She had underestimated my daughter, and she had underestimated me. By the next morning, I had filed an emergency motion. Through my legal channels, I requested a protective order against Karen, filed civil charges, and secured a restraining order. I made sure every step was documented. I wanted this airtight. Meanwhile, Daniel contacted a trauma therapist, one who specialized in child PTSD cases. We started sessions immediately. Lily barely spoke, but when she did, the stories that came out of her, of the lady with the wire, of being told she was bad and messy and loud, they painted a terrifying portrait. Karen, for her part, lawyered up and played the victim. She told police she had merely secured the garden to protect property and that Lily must have wandered off and gotten tangled. She denied seeing her, denied touching her, denied everything, but the evidence said otherwise. The camera footage from our security system was damning. It showed Karen walking through the back alley, holding the wire coil. It showed her entering the garden alone with gloves. Then, several minutes later, it showed Lily walking toward the garden, curious, calling for her doll that had rolled away. The footage didn't catch the act itself. It was angled wrong, but the sequence, the timeline, the audio, the intention, it was enough. I sent the footage directly to the district attorney's office, along with every HOA complaint we had received, Karen's emails, and even statements from neighbors who had finally found the courage to come forward. One neighbor, an elderly widow who lived 3 doors down, confessed that Karen had once threatened to fine her for hanging a wind chime because it was too whimsical for the neighborhood. Another recalled Karen telling her to call animal control whenever children played too close to her flower beds. A pattern was forming, one that screamed malice, not just pettiness but targeted, deliberate cruelty. When the story hit the media, it exploded. Federal judge's daughter found bound in HOA garden ran on every local station, then spread nationally. Interviews poured in. Reporters camped outside our gate. Some came for the shock value. Others came for the bigger question. How does something like this happen in a neighborhood like that? Karen's attorney tried to shift the narrative. He blamed mental health, claimed she had suffered a stress-induced lapse in judgment. They even floated the idea that the wire was part of a garden art installation, not a trap. But public opinion had already turned. The footage, the photos, the image of a 5-year-old girl in a hospital bed, bruised and broken, was too strong to spin. Still, I wasn't satisfied with public sympathy. I wanted legal justice. So I turned to the very institution I'd served for years. I stepped down from any cases involving the district, temporarily recused myself, and became, ironically, just another mother navigating a broken system. But I used every ounce of my experience to make it count. We filed both civil and criminal charges. Civil for damages, for emotional trauma, for medical bills, for psychological harm. Criminal for child endangerment, assault with a deadly weapon, and unlawful restraint. The HOA tried to distance themselves. Karen acted independently, they claimed, but email records and meeting transcripts told another story. She had long pushed for tighter child regulations. She had lobbied for fines, supported banning toys in driveways, and even proposed a motion to install quiet zones on playgrounds. When I confronted the HOA board in person, at a public meeting attended by half the neighborhood, I didn't raise my voice. I simply read aloud a letter Lily had written in therapy. "Dear Garden, I don't like you anymore. You hurt me. I don't like your flowers. I don't want to go there again. I want to fly away." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. The board was dismantled within the month. The president resigned. Karen's volunteer status was revoked. A new leadership council was elected, this time with diversity, parents, and actual empathy. But that didn't undo the damage. Lily's recovery was slow. She became afraid of grass, of gardens, of anything outdoors. She'd flinch when someone raised their voice. Sometimes she'd crawl under the table when the doorbell rang. It shattered me in places I didn't know existed. No ruling, no verdict could fix that. And yet, something began to shift. She started painting again. Not with chalk, not on sidewalks, but with watercolors on paper. She painted suns with smiles and trees with wings. In one picture, she painted a woman in a black robe holding a sword made of flowers. "It's you, Mommy," she said. "You make the bad things go away." I held that picture for a long time. The courtroom proceedings were brutal. Karen sat with her attorney, stone-faced, unapologetic. She never looked at me, never looked at Lily. When the verdict came, guilty on 3 counts, including felony child endangerment, she gasped for the first time. Her composure cracked. The sentence was fair. Not maximum, but symbolic. She would serve time. She would register. She would lose the power she once held like a crown. And I stood with Lily outside the courthouse steps, holding her hand as flashbulbs popped and reporters swarmed. I didn't give speeches. I didn't seek pity. I only said one thing to the cameras: no title, no neighborhood rulebook, no HOA policy is above a child's safety. My daughter's life matters. Your child's life matters. And we will never be silent again. The crowd erupted. Today, Lily is healing. Slowly. Steadily. She smiles more. Plays more. She still doesn't like gardens, but she plants flowers in pots and names them things like hope and brave. Her therapist says she's strong, that her ability to express herself is a sign of deep resilience. As for me, I returned to the bench. Not immediately, but once I felt I could stand with both strength and clarity. And now, every time I look out at a courtroom, I remember the importance of justice, not just on paper, but in action. Because justice isn't just what happens in a courtroom. Sometimes, justice is a mother bleeding from her hands to save her child. Sometimes it's a little girl painting the world back into color. And sometimes it's looking your enemy in the eye, not with hate, but with the quiet, burning truth. You lost. You failed. Because you didn't know who you were messing with. You thought I was just another mom, but I'm her mother. And I am a federal judge. The courtroom was packed. Reporters elbowed for space behind the glass partitions. Murmurs filled the air like static, and the faint smell of cologne and sweat clung to the wooden benches. For once, I wasn't sitting behind the bench in my black robe, calling the court to order. I was on the other side, as a plaintiff, as a mother. I felt the shift in gravity the moment I walked in holding Lily's hand. Every eye turned to us. Not because I was a federal judge, but because I was the woman whose daughter had been found tied with razor wire by a neighborhood sociopath masquerading as an HOA guardian. Karen sat just feet away, jaw tight, arms crossed, eyes bloodshot. She looked smaller than I remembered, deflated, worn. Her trademark arrogance seemed to have slipped through the cracks of a beige pantsuit. Yet, the corners of her mouth still twitched with entitlement, like she believed this was all some big misunderstanding that she'd eventually walk away from, with her dignity and her power intact. But not today. The prosecution didn't waste time. They opened with the video footage from my home security system, Karen walking toward the garden, coiled wire in hand, gloves on. The jury watched in silence as Lily's tiny figure toddled off in pursuit of a toy, her soft voice echoing, "Where's Mr. Mouse?" The next clip showed paramedics swarming the garden. Photos followed. Photos of Lily's injuries, the welts, the bruises. Her dollhouse left abandoned on the porch. Her drawings, now smeared with blood and rain. Karen's defense tried everything. They painted her as an overwhelmed volunteer under pressure from a disorganized HOA. They claimed she had a mild psychological episode brought on by menopause and unresolved grief from a past trauma. They attempted to deflect, pointing fingers at the HOA board, the bylaws, even me, suggesting I use my position to manipulate media sympathy. But the evidence was ironclad. And then came the background check. The prosecution introduced evidence that stunned the courtroom. Karen had previously filed complaints in 2 other neighborhoods before moving to Crestwood Oaks, complaints targeting young children, particularly those with special needs. In one case, she had reported a 7-year-old boy for using a loud voice while playing with a toy lawnmower. In another, she lobbied to remove a swing set from a community park, citing aesthetic disruption. Each time, she had quietly relocated when pushback came, never held accountable, always starting fresh in the next pristine suburb. But this time, she went too far. The highlight of the trial came when Lily was called in, not to testify, but simply to sit and draw. The judge approved it as a therapeutic exercise recommended by her counselor. She sat beside me with crayons and a sketch pad. She didn't say a word. But when the bailiff collected her drawing at the end of the day and submitted it into evidence, it hit like a hammer. It showed a big gray house with a black cloud over it, a small girl standing alone in a patch of thorns, and in the corner, a figure in a long robe with stars on her chest holding a sword made of flowers between the thorns and the girl. No explanation needed. The jury saw it. The judge saw it. And Karen? For the first time, she looked away. Within hours, the verdict came in. Guilty on all major counts: felony child endangerment, unlawful restraint, and aggravated assault with intent to harm. Karen's sentencing was set for the following month, but the judge ordered immediate custody, citing risk of continued danger to the public. As the officers placed cuffs around her wrists, Karen finally spoke, soft, trembling, barely audible. "I was only trying to keep order. Kids like her don't belong in neighborhoods like this." Silence fell across the courtroom. My fingers tightened around Lily's. But before I could rise to respond, the judge beat me to it. "And people like you, Ms. Harper, don't belong in any neighborhood." The gavel came down. And just like that, it was over. But the fallout had just begun. Crestwood Oaks descended into chaos. The HOA board was dismantled within weeks. Members either resigned or were voted out after internal emails surfaced showing not only awareness of Karen's behavior, but passive support. They had forwarded her complaints, printed and distributed her child-free lawn zone suggestions in monthly newsletters, and dismissed resident pushback as overreactions. I filed a class action civil suit on behalf of every family in the community affected by Karen's reign of terror. Over a dozen parents joined. The lawsuit exposed HOA negligence, manipulation of bylaws, and discriminatory practices against families with children. We won the case. A massive settlement was awarded. But more than that, we forced systemic change. New HOA guidelines were drafted, this time with community input, transparency clauses, and a rotating board to prevent monopolies of power. Mandatory sensitivity training was implemented. Families returned to their yards. Children played again, some for the first time in months. And Lily? Lily began to bloom. Her therapist said art saved her, giving her a way to reclaim her world. She painted everything now. Windows, shoes, even old flower pots. She no longer flinched when walking outside. Her giggle slowly returned, echoing in the same garden where once she had been hurt. And when I asked her one night what she wanted to be when she grew up, she didn't hesitate. A judge, she whispered, like mommy, but I want to use flower swords too. I smiled through tears. You already do, baby. The media didn't let the story die. National networks picked it up. Talk shows invited us to speak. I declined most, but made one televised appearance to say this. This isn't just about Karen. It's about unchecked power. It's about what happens when authority is given to those who mistake cruelty for order. It's about the quiet ways that people oppress others in gated communities behind bylaws under the banner of neighborhood standards. My daughter is not a disruption. She is not noise. She is not a violation. She is light, and she will never be silenced again. That clip went viral. Parents across the country reached out, sharing stories of similar HOA abuse, silent discrimination, and neglected justice. A movement began. We founded a nonprofit, Voices in the Garden, dedicated to defending families from HOA harassment and advocating for more inclusive, child-friendly policies in housing developments. Karen remained in prison, her appeal denied. The judge's final statement during sentencing said it all. This court does not only punish your actions, it condemns the thinking behind them. You did not act out of fear. You acted out of control. And in doing so, you wounded an innocent child. You will answer for that every day. And me? I returned to the bench with a fire I hadn't felt in years. But this time, I wore something under my robe. A tiny pin lily gave me shaped like a flower sword. Because justice, I've learned, is not always loud. Sometimes justice is the quiet strength of a mother who refuses to back down. Sometimes justice is a little girl painting the world back together. And sometimes justice is watching the woman who tried to break you realize, too late, who she was really dealing with. You tied my daughter in wire, but you woke a warrior. And in the end, you lost everything. There are moments in life that break time in half, before the nightmare and after it. Before the razor wire, before the ambulance lights, before my daughter whispered, I didn't do anything wrong. And then after I held her tiny hand in a hospital bed, after I faced down a courtroom instead of standing behind one, after I watched a woman who believed she owned our peace get dragged away in handcuffs. This wasn't just about an HOA or about a cruel neighbor. It was about a system that gave power to someone who thought silence meant permission. It was about a woman who confused control with righteousness and targeted a child to make a point. But she failed, not just because she broke the law, but because she awoke something far stronger than she ever imagined. She thought I was just another mom. She didn't know I was a federal judge. And more importantly, she didn't know what happens when you mess with a mother's child. To every parent out there, if you've ever felt cornered, unheard, or powerless in your own neighborhood, you are not alone. You don't have to stay silent. You don't have to fold just to fit in. You have the right to protect your family, to demand fairness, and to call out injustice, even when it's hiding behind white fences and smiley newsletters. We didn't ask for this fight, but once it came to our door, we didn't back down. And neither should you. If this story hit your heart, if it reminded you of something you faced or something you fear, then let's make sure no one ever feels that alone again. Subscribe to this channel, HOA Denied Access, because we're not just telling stories, we're exposing truth. We're standing up to the Karens, the fake rules, the weaponized regulations. We're defending the families who've been bullied and silenced for far too long. This isn't the end. This is just the beginning. So share this. Talk about this. And the next time someone tells you you don't belong here, you look them right in the eye and say, watch me fight back. This is HOA Denied Access, where justice has a voice. And love? Love never backs down.